Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be talking about the battle that's raging between Disney and two writers over who owns the Predator franchise, and the implications for this are massive. It could really hurt Disney in a big way. We've seen a lot written about it, but more clarifications coming through as court documents are becoming available, and that's what we're going to look at here. There's a lot of legal mumbo jumbo, but what does it all mean? Well, today I'm going to break it all down, tell you exactly what's going on and predict who's going to end up with what. Does it look good for the Predator franchise? We'll stick around and find out. Hollywood Reporter ran a story about how the original Predator writers Jim and John Thomas have exercised their right under copyright law to take back the rights of their original script. 35 years have passed since they sold the script to 20th Century Fox, and the conditions of the law give them the right to cancel transfer of rights and take back control. This is all fair enough, we've seen it happen a lot recently. Wes Craven's estate took back the rights to A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Clive Barker now controls Hellraiser again. But it's not always cut and dried, as Victor Miller found out when he tried to take back Friday the 13th rights, and that franchise has now been mired in legal appeals for about 5 years. Disney now own 20th Century Fox, and they purchased the studio with an eye to exploiting their franchises, Predator being one of them. They don't want to lose any of these franchises, not when they see big bucks in the future, and they're doing all they can to extend their rights. So the fight is going to get dirty. Let's take a deep dive into what's going on. Before we move on, remember to hit like and subscribe. It will really help the channel grow and bring you more videos. So the Hollywood Reporter broke the story, and they wrote, Jim and John Thomas, the brothers who wrote the 1987 action film Predator, have filed a lawsuit against Disney seeking confirmation of successfully recapturing rights to the franchise. Meanwhile, Disney's 20th Century unit has filed its own suit against the Thomas brothers, with the goal of retaining rights. The Thomas brothers are seeking to exploit copyright law's termination provision, which allows authors to cancel transfers after waiting a period of time, typically 35 years for newer works. Given the time frame, studios are facing the prospect of losing franchise rights to many iconic works from the 1980s. Predator starred Arnold Schwarzenegger and spawned 3 sequels plus a spin-off movie series Alien vs Predator. Reportedly, Disney has been eyeing a reboot with 10 Cloverfield Lane director Dan Trachtenberg at the helm. Now this isn't true, there is a new movie and it's actually currently filming, but the article goes on. Such plans by Disney may face an obstacle in the form of termination. According to the complaint, the effective termination date for their screenplay, originally titled Hunters, is April 17th. So the rule is, a writer can terminate the transfer of the rights to his work after 35 years. Jim and John Thomas optioned their script to Fox on 22nd of January 1985, but it wasn't until April 16th, 1986 that Fox exercised that option. And this is the date from which the agreement begins. So 35 years on from that is when the rights transferred back to Jim and John Thomas. The effective date is April 17, 2021. Jim and John Thomas say they served a termination notice all the way back in 2016, and for 4.5 years heard no objection. I found this interesting. Fox never once objected to the rights being returned. I find it impossible to believe the management were unaware of this and wouldn't fight back. Now during that time, Disney and Comcast were engaged in a bidding war to buy Fox. Fox wouldn't want any negative press showing they could be in danger of losing key franchises. It would weaken their brand, so I can see why they kept quiet about it. Ultimately, Disney won and now own Fox, and they have a film in production. They have a lot at stake here and don't want to lose franchise rights, and they are arguing this falls under another provision. As stated in their complaint, in early January 2021, Defendants Counsel unexpectedly contacted Plaintiffs' Counsel contesting the termination notice as supposedly untimely, based on a theory that the 1986 grant of the screenplay underlying their Predator films allegedly qualified for the special delayed termination time window intended for book publication grants. So what is the provision for publication they're talking about here in regards to termination of rights? Termination of the grant may be effected at any time during a period of 5 years, beginning at the end of 35 years from the date of execution of the grant, or if the grant covers the right of publication of the work, the period begins at the end of 35 years from the date of publication of the work under the grant, or at the end of 40 years from the date of execution of the grant, whichever term ends earlier. So what does that mean and why is it there? Well, it's included to cover publishers in a situation where they've given an advance payment to an author before he's written the work. It's protection for the publisher's investment, giving them a full 35 years to sell that work before rights return to the author. So it's clearly about printed works. But what Fox Disney are saying is that the publication date here is the theatrical release of the movie. 35 years from that date means the effective termination date is June 14th, 2022, giving them a full year to finish and release their new movie before the rights elapse. In response, the Thomas brothers say they served alternative notices of termination with later effective termination dates. That hasn't satisfied Disney, so the Thomas brothers are now seeking declaratory relief. They're represented by Mark Toberoff, who's been somewhat of a specialist in copyright termination, notably representing Friday the 13th writer in a court win. Within hours of the filing by the Thomas brothers, Disney's 20th Century division had its own lawsuit ready to go. So what it's saying here is the Thomas brothers issued additional notices to cover the June 14th date based on the theatrical release. So this is where it gets crazy. The statute states they must give 2 years notice of termination, and they didn't advise on this June 14th date until January this year, which is 5 months notice. It doesn't matter they gave initial notification 4 years ago for the earlier date. For this new date, they have to give another 2 years notice. So to cover themselves, they've given additional notice with an effective date of 2023. But remember, the law says the period begins at the end of 35 years from the date of publication of the work under the grant, or at the end of 40 years from the date of execution of the grant. Now Disney are pushing for a further provision that would move the termination date to 40 years, meaning Fox Disney would hold the rights until 2026. So Disney Fox are squirming to find every loophole they can to delay the decision, and they're arguing that the writers are prematurely terminating the rights. 20th Century seeks a declaration that defendants' notices of termination are invalid. This action is necessary because defendants are improperly attempting to prematurely terminate 20th Century's rights to the Hunter's screenplay at the very time that 20th Century is investing substantial time, money and effort in developing another instalment in its successful Predator franchise. So it's an interesting time. It's a real David and Goliath fight, but what will the ultimate decision be, and what do Fox Disney stand to lose? Earlier, I mentioned Wes Craven's estate taking back rights to A Nightmare on Elm Street. That was a pretty straightforward process. Wes Craven had written that script on spec and shopped it around Hollywood. The script had everything in it: Freddy Krueger, his motives, his origins, even his visual look. Same with Clive Barker in Hellraiser. That was based on a pre-published work, so there's no argument that he wasn't the originator of the project. But what's going on with Predator is more complicated and bears similarities to the Friday the 13th case. That's still going through appeal, but as it currently stands, writer Victor Miller owns the rights to his original script, where Pamela Voorhees is a killer and Jason is her dead son. But Sean Cunningham owns the rights to the sequels, The Hockey Mask, the undead killer called Jason. And to further complicate matters, Paramount own the name Friday the 13th. So it's very fragmented, and I think that's what's likely to happen here with Predator. Jim and John Thomas should clearly get the rights to their first script back. They'll own the characters, the mission into the jungle, the alien trophy hunter and his gadgets. They'll have all of that, but the script they sold was called Hunters, not Predator. That name came later. Therefore, the Thomas brothers won't own the name Predator, nor will they own the creature. It's well known that filming began with a totally different creature design. The director was unhappy with the way it worked on set and had the creature totally redesigned until we got the classic alien monster we know. So while the Thomas brothers will own the original script, Fox Disney will own the name Predator and the creature design. You might think that's enough for Fox Disney to continue making films, so long as they don't reference the original movie. But where the wrinkle comes in is if the deal extends to derivative works like sequels, reboots and spin-offs. And if they want to get Arnie back to play Dutch, as I imagine Disney would be considering right now, then they need to do a deal with the Thomas brothers. The best thing for fans is if Disney cut the Thomas brothers a deal, allowing them free use of all aspects of the franchise. But this opens a can of worms. There's a lot more movies and franchises that are moving into this time frame where writers can terminate the rights and take back control, and you can bet there's a load more creators watching carefully to see what the result of this case is. So it's not great for fans right now. There's a chance future films could be stuck as the court case drags out, but hopefully the parties can come to a fair arrangement and Predator doesn't end up in limbo like Jason. Thanks for sticking with me this long. Remember to hit the like button, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.